Good evening. I just wanted to do a quick ranking the albums video for a band that is near and dear to my heart, and I'm talking, of course, about Henry Cow. Um, Legendary band, although probably not exactly in the public consciousness much these days. But for those that don't know, Henry Cow was sort of the pioneering band of the rock and opposition movement, kind of an avant-garde progressive rock style music that I think they were very much the forerunners of. There's really no other band that sounds quite like them. They're a very challenging listen, extremely challenging. Some of the most challenging music that I'm aware of for sure. So their music is progressive, but it doesn't really sound anything like Yes or King Crimson or any of those bands so much. I mean, maybe King Crimson at their strangest sort of is a bit of a comparison that you might make, but they are very much, I would say, more closely related to the Canterbury scene, even though they're not a Canterbury band themselves. For those of you that are familiar with bands, maybe like Matching Mole, or maybe something like Hatfield in the North, that's a bit more, but it's not the sort of zany quirkiness, really. It's more just avant-garde, off the wall, kind of bombastic at times and very dark at times, similar to maybe like a Universe Zero. So Henry Cow was formed in 1968 in Cambridge University, and I'm not going to go through the history of the band in terms of the personnel and the changes and so forth. You can certainly find that information fairly easily online. For those of you that are interested, I will say that they were just the core of the band was really Tim Hodgkinson, Fred Frith, and Chris Cutler. So all multi-instrumentalists, but Fred Frith on guitar and Chris Cutler on drums. Just of note, also John Greaves was in the band, I believe, for the first three or four albums, depending on how you count. And you might know him from the Accused and Cures album by National Health, which is a really, really awesome album. So, there was at least a little bit of crossover between Henry Cow and some of the bands in the Canterbury scene. So it's a relatively short discography. I have 4 albums here that I'm going to rank. And I'll actually rank the one more album, the 5th album. So starting from my least favorite at number 5 is going to be an album called Desperate Straits. So it's debatable whether or not this is actually really a Henry Cow album. It's sort of a crossover album between Slap Happy and Henry Cow. But I think, it's kind of branded more as a Slap Happy album, who were sort of like a German, I believe they were, at least Dagmar Krause, the singer, was German, and kind of a avant pop type music. I like that album because I actually am a fan of Dagmar Krause's vocals, although not everyone is. But to me, that album, I was debating whether or not to even include it in this ranking, because it doesn't really sound very much like Henry Cow to me. It sounds more like they were sort of the backing band for Dagmar, and I don't know. I don't know enough about that album. I've listened to it. I do enjoy it, but it's not one that I find that I'm looking to go back to so often. Yeah, so in terms of my history with the band, I became aware of these guys, many years ago in college, when I was kind of getting into progressive rock, and I was just looking for some of the, I was really into like finding the most challenging music, some of the weirdest stuff at some point. And I've kind of come and gone with these guys. They are not a band that is like an everyday listen, or probably even every week or every month. I mean, you really have to be in the mood for it. But I've always been extremely intrigued by these guys. I think that's the word that I would use. It's the ultimate, like, how did this get made music, and how, I mean, it's complicated, it's extremely strange, and there's just no commercial viability for it whatsoever, even in the heyday of progressive rock, when I think that, the general public's ears are perhaps more receptive to something a little bit more challenging. I mean, certainly today, there would be no hope of anyone putting any kind of financial weight behind this band. And even back then, it seems just so strange to me, and their commitment to just doing exactly what they wanted without any hope of probably finding any kind of commercial success is something that I really admire. So I've always been very intrigued by this band, but I don't really consider that album Desperate Straits as part of like the core of the band, as part of their core releases. So that brings me to kind of what I'll consider the sort of true 4 albums that I think most people would look at with this band. I don't own Desperate Straits. I do own the other 4 on vinyl. So number 4 for me is the debut album, Legend, or Leg End. Get it? It's a sock. This album is, I can't even imagine what the reception, or what people must have thought of this album when it came out in 1973. It's just so different, I mean, than just about anything that had been released up until that time, with the exception of maybe Zappa, some of the early Mothers and Zappa works, which I don't know if these guys were influenced by Zappa. It certainly sounds to me like they were. I like how this album starts off. I'm a fan of the Fred Frith composition, Nirvana for Mice. I do like Amygdala as well, the Hodgkinson composition. But some of the teen beat stuff, this band is, you have to kind of give it your undivided attention. And even when you're trying to do that, sometimes, I find that my mind wanders a little bit when it comes to the teen beat stuff. And not just on this album, but really all their albums, because there's nothing resembling a hook or a melody that's gonna like really grab you. It's just more the ostentatiousness of it, because it is wild stuff. But I do like side 1 of this album. I think a bit more than side 2. But yeah, I mean, just wild stuff. I mean, really, engineered by Mike Oldfield. Interesting bit there. So there were clearly people that that enjoyed this band and were willing to kind of stump for them. But I think this album, maybe they had been around already for several years before this was released, but I don't know that they had really found their footing totally yet with this. Yeah, interesting music though. And probably the one that I don't come back to quite as often out of the core 4 though is that one. And then my third favorite would be, so this is the next album, and you'll see a little pattern kind of with how it goes in terms of what my favorites are. So this is, their second album, and my third favorite from 1974. This is Unrest. Again, I'm not going to go into the personnel changes, but I will just note that this is the first appearance of Lindsay Cooper on the album, and so she, I believe, contributes bassoon as well as some other instruments. The thing with this album is, they had like 3 compositions that make up side one. Bittern, Storm over Ulm, Fred Frith composition, Half Asleep, Half Awake by Greaves, and then another Frith composition, Ruins, which is like a signature Henry Cow song, and those made up side one. So side one is awesome. In particular, Ruins is like that's like the song that I think, if you're gonna try and like explain Henry Cow to someone, that might be a good place to start. It is like awesome, and so many different movements, some really creepy parts, some just wild interlocking, musical stretches, and some stuff that is just straight up bizarre. And so I do like side one. In fact, Ruins is one of my favorite Henry Cow songs, of all time. I guess for me, side two, I think it was mainly just improvised stuff that they did in the studio, and it doesn't quite work as well. And you can kind of see, just based on what's written there, that side two, there's no composer, it just says Henry Cow, and I think it was all just studio improvisations. But there are some really nice moments. In particular, I like the last movement on side two, Deluge, quite a bit. There's some really like wistful, almost sad, regretful type sounds coming out from that particular movement of the track, or that particular track. I mean, it is labeled its own song, but sort of feels like it's all one big composition on side two. I could be totally off on this, but like I said, I'm not like an aficionado or a true student of Henry Cow. They're just a band that I've been, very intrigued by for many years, as I said before. But so this album for me is a little like spottier, but the highlights on this album are awesome. In particular, Ruins, really, really interesting stuff. Okay, and then I think for a lot of people this is probably their least favorite out of the four that I own, at least. This is In Praise of Learning, and so this is again a crossover album with Slap Happy. So you have vocals on the entire album, and Dagmar Krause's vocals can be very divisive. I mean, some people are not, a fan of hers, and it is strange. I mean, the vocals are undoubtedly, very, very odd, but I don't know, somehow it works for me. And kind of the centerpiece of this album is going to be the second track there, Living in the Heart of the Beast, which is like over 16, I think it's like over 16 minutes long, and it's just wild. Some crazy stuff on that album. On that track. And I also really like track 4, Beautiful as the Moon, Terrible as an Army with Banners. There's some really cool like polymetric kind of things going on, where it's like I can't even figure out what time signature is or what they're doing really rhythmically. Really interesting album. The only one that's going to have like a lyric sheet like this, because although there are some vocals in the other albums, it's mainly just nonsense or stuff that's barely audible. And so, I mean, one thing too that's cool about this album is it kind of gives you some insight into their politics. They were an extremely left-leaning band. I mean, I've heard them branded as communists. I don't know if that's true or not. I hesitate to say or get into that aspect of the band, but you can read the lyrics in Praise of Learning and kind of get a sense of where they're coming from politically, which is kind of cool because the rest of the albums are primarily instrumental. And then my favorite album, number one for me, is going to be Western Culture from 1979. So it says 1978 on here, but I think that's when they recorded it, because everything I can find online says it was released in 79. By the way, In Praise of Learning was from 75. I can't remember if I said that. And Unrest was from 74. So, what you can see is I actually like the albums better as it went along in their discography. So my least favorite out of the Core 4, whatever you want to call it, was Legend, or Legend, the first album. My favorite was actually the last one. So Western Culture. And yeah, I don't know. This album, it sort of just hangs together a little better to me. I find that it's cohesive. The first side is just awesome. I mean, you just put this on, and that track Industry just kind of blows your hair back because it's just so dissonant and angry sounding, you know. But it's just so good. It's like I don't know. There's something just so, I don't know, just brave, or like this band just didn't care, you know. They just kind of did whatever they wanted. I don't see a dedicated bass player in this album because John Greaves, I believe, was on the prior three, but he was not on this album. Maybe he was, I don't know if this would coincide with when he was in National Health. It feels like it would be around the same time. But I could be wrong on that. But you still got Hodgkinson, Cooper, Fred Frith, and Chris Cutler on this album. And it's a weird one, but it feels more cohesive to me than the other ones, and it just I don't know, somehow works the best for me out of all of them. So that's it. That's my favorite one, and I think, you know, I mean, I've kind of gushed about this band, but again, they are a band that you have to be in the mood for, and you know, there's part of me that wonders, like, is it more an admiration as opposed to an actual enjoyment that I get out of the music from this band? Because I do find sometimes, because it is such strange music, and there's often very much, it's often just instrumental with no sort of choruses or hooks or anything to sort of like, there's no earworms or anything like that in this music. And I don't even know if this is really a rock band. I mean, they're sort of labeled progressive rock, but it just doesn't really sound like any other rock music that I'm aware of. I mean, there's somewhere in between rock and classical, probably, and a little bit of jazz influence as well. But yeah, really interesting band, and I hope you guys check them out. Let me know what you think. Peace.